Hi, I'm Kelly, and so I'm here to talk about experimentation, tone, and emotional design. So 10,000-foot view, I'm going to talk a little bit about A/B testing, and if you haven't done it before, you'll learn what it is, and hopefully I'll sell you on it a little bit, because I think it's very cool. And I'll walk through a very minimal code implementation of an experimentation framework, and then from there, we'll talk about the psychology of emotional design and how we can use those principles to make our experiments better. So a little bit about me. I work at Twitter. I've been there about a year, and we do a lot of experimenting at Twitter. So in the last year, my team has run about 6 experiments. And so most recently, we shipped this thing called Quote Tweet. It's where you could retweet somebody else's tweet and add your own comment at the top, and then we kind of display the quoted tweet in line. And before that, we worked on the while you were away experience. So when you leave the app for more than 6 hours and you come back, then we'll summarize some of the tweets that you've missed that we think you'll like. So what is A/B testing? So A/B testing is this concept of showing 2 different things to the user and then seeing which one performs better. A lot of companies use A/B testing. So here are just a few that I found: Airbnb, Amazon, eBay, Netflix. So why would you want to experiment, or why would you want to A/B test? A/B testing is a great way to learn about user behavior. You can try something new on your users, and you can try it on kind of a smaller subset so that you're not alienating a lot of people if it turns out bad. And you can also just tweak what you already have to kind of get to the best version and maybe drive up sales or signups or clicks or whatever metric you're going for. So here's one great example of an A/B test, and I kind of like the story behind this. So when Obama was campaigning in 2008, he stopped at Google HQ, and he gave a big talk, and he's like, I think that you guys can help me, you should help me. And a PM there took him really literally, and he quit Google, and he joined Obama's team, and he joined their new media campaign. So his first thing that he did there is he looked at this landing page for Obama's campaign as kind of like driving up newsletter signups. And he was like, is this the right picture? Is this the right button? Like, this is the gateway. Can we improve on this? And so I'd like to poll you right now and see if you guys can figure out which one performed better. So who thinks that the one on the left, the blue version, performed better? Not very many, like 20%. Okay, how many people think that the version on the right performed better? Okay, you guys are right. So that one performed 40% better, which actually translated to an additional 2.8 million subscribers. And from that, they got 288,000 volunteers and $57 million in donations. So if you're like me, you're like, okay, 57 million sounds like a lot. How much does it cost to run a campaign? Turns out Obama's 2008 campaign cost $750 million. So 57 of that came from a change to a picture and a button text, which is crazy. So here's another example of an experiment. IGN, the entertainment website, they wanted to drive traffic to their videos link. And so they tried moving it out of the darker nav into like a totally separate area. So another poll, who thinks that this was effective? Moving it out performed better? 3 people? Really? Okay. And then who thinks that it was better where it was? Okay, you guys just aren't voting. There's like 10 people that time. Okay. So it actually performed 92% worse. It was a disaster. Okay, last one, ABC Family. The goal for this experiment was to just try to lower their bounce rate. They just wanted people to engage with the site more. And so this is the original. They just have like kind of 3 big pictures, and then they changed it out for smaller pictures with more links. So last poll, please participate. Who thinks that the original was actually better? They liked the big pictures better? Okay, like a third. And then who thinks that the variation with all the links did better? Okay. Actually, the variation performed 600% better, 6 times better. So the reason that I'm showing you all of this is to not make some of you feel smart and some of you feel dumb. It's more like, it's really unintuitive. Most of these I wouldn't have guessed right. And so experimenting is a great way to sort of not have to guess. Like, you can try both and see which performs better and know that you're shipping the right thing. Okay, so hopefully you want to get started. And so now let's talk about how you can. Imagine that you work at Twitter with me, and your boss comes to you and says, hey, your goal for the year, we need to drive up tweets. Like, we're here, we need to be here, we need a lot more tweets. So what do you do? What do you propose we do to drive up tweets? So let's talk a little bit about hypotheses and how to form a good one. So a good hypothesis should make a statement and it should also be testable. So let's try a few out. Why do some people tweet more than others? This is not a great hypothesis, even though it's a really interesting question that I would love to know the answer to, but it doesn't really make a guess, and it's not measurable in any way. So we'll try again. Users will love Twitter if our tone is more fun. So this is a little bit better. We have a place to start. We're going to adjust our text maybe to something more fun to our users, but users loving Twitter is very squishy. How are we going to measure that? So one more time, users will tweet more if our call to action is more fun. So we're trying to drive up tweets, so a good thing to measure is tweets, that's great, and then we're going to change the text on our call to action, which is here. We have a tweet box at the top, and inside it says what's happening. But is what's happening the right text? Maybe we could try something a little bit different. We could try what's on your mind, or maybe we could even just try sup. So all of the variations that I've shown here, the what's happening and sup, these are all examples of sort of refining. And so the great thing about experimenting is that you can try both of these types of experiments, the refining type and then also exploration. So in this diagram, you can see that kind of the best solution is kind of we're not even honing in on the right direction. So when you do kind of like more out of the box thinking, maybe you just have like a 1% group that gets something totally crazy. And then you can kind of hone in on maybe the best version. So we'll stick though with just the refining and we'll try changing out the placeholder text. So we have a hypothesis. Users will tweet more if our call to action is more fun, and we have a design. So now what do we do with that? So old school, if you don't have an experimentation framework, you could literally just change the placeholder text in your app and then measure maybe last week we got like 1 million tweets, and then maybe this week we put the text up in there and people really liked it, we got 1.2 million tweets. So it kind of seems like 20% increase, we should keep this is good, right? But this is not very scientific. It's not taking into account any kind of environmental variables, like things that are going on in the world around you. And in this example, it was election week, so maybe we got a huge spike in traffic. And it kind of looks from our framework that we accomplished that by changing our placeholder text, and really it was totally irrelevant. So this is where an experimentation framework comes in. So we need kind of 3 pieces to create an experimentation framework. So we need this concept of like bucketing our users. So some people will get just the normal treatment, and then some people will get experimental treatment. They'll get that subtext. And so having one bucket with people who are getting the experimental treatment, we also want to have like in parallel, we want a control group to help establish a baseline so that after the week or the month or however long we're running our experiment, we can kind of see how they compare. 2, we need to have multiple code baths in our code base so that you can say, okay, if this is an experiment user, this is what our HTML looks like, and if this is a control user or a regular user, then they get some other code path. And then finally, we need to be collecting data about how they're interacting with the site in the time that we're running the experiment. So I have a very short example of kind of like a super minimal implementation of an experimentation framework. And so the goal is that we would have these 2 tweet boxes with different text, and then at the end of the week or the month, we can look at how people interacted with the site and kind of make a decision about which one performed better. So maybe we look at tweets per page view or something like that. So here is a very simple index.php. We're using cookies to set the experiment bucket because if the user closes the window and comes back, we want them to have a consistent experience. So in this case, it's really low tech. It's just I'm using a random number between 1 and 10 so that I can bucket 10% of users. And then it's just a simple switch case. So if the random number they were assigned is 1, then they're in the experiment. If the random number is 2, then they're our control group. We'll kind of watch what the control people are doing in tandem. And then finally, we have a last bucket, which is just none. And the reason we set the none is so that when we check the cookie for a new session, that we're not re-bucketing people. Okay, so second part, multiple code paths. So at the bottom, or in the middle, I guess, we have the input, like the actual HTML, and inside it you can see the placeholder text is set to a PHP variable just being echoed out. And at the top, we're setting that based on whether or not we've bucketed them in the experiment. So this allows us to show some placeholder text on certain users and a different one on other users. And then finally, we need to be collecting data about usage. So this is just super simple. It's just like a JavaScript listener to see when the user is clicking on either the input box or the tweet button. We're just going to send off an AJAX request to some database somewhere that says, hey, here's some metadata about the event that happened, and logging it. So at the end, we end up with, I use Google Docs, but you could use any database. We have a bunch of information, and you can run a query and kind of just compare how the different buckets performed. So that was super stripped down, like bad UI, but at Twitter we have a super robust, like you run an experiment, you have all these great graphs and things like that. This is Optimizely. They're a third-party service that does experimentation, and so you can see here that there's a lot more data to show how many users and how long it's been running and things like that. And then there's also this concept of running experiments kind of for a longer period of time. And this is really valuable when you have something that may have novelty effect. So something that maybe is not very intuitive at first, but then people learn to love, or vice versa, something that seems kind of cool and then people hate it later. So it's great to run an experiment for a little longer, and you can see the Optimizely dashboard kind of shows things kind of leveling out. We've done like kind of a at-home solution, the sort of DIY category. And if you're going to do this, there are a lot of open source libraries that you can look into adding to your site. There's also third-party services. I'm sure most of you have used Google Analytics, where you kind of just paste a little bit of JavaScript in your app, and it kind of tracks usage for you. And then Optimizely is what I was just showing in the last screen. There's also a couple low-tech options that I really like. So MailChimp allows you to run an A/B test with your newsletter, and you can try one version of maybe the title text or the from field, and then based on how many people open which version, then they'll go ahead and send out the rest to the successful one. They'll send that to the rest of your subscribers. And then PickFu is really cool. It's just kind of like a market research site. And you can essentially put in 2 pictures and then just show them to like a poll of users. And the users are getting paid to just kind of rate which one they like better, which is a cool way to get feedback without having to invest in a whole experimentation framework. Okay, so we've talked about why you might want to experiment and also kind of how to create an experimentation framework. So finally, let's just talk a little bit about how we can make better hypotheses and make better guesses using other fields, and in this case, emotional design. So in his book, Donald Norman talks about the 3 levels of cognitive processing. We have the visceral, the behavioral, and the reflective. So the visceral is sort of how we initially react to things. People happen to like symmetry and nice color palettes and nice sounds, things like that. Behavioral is about usability, so how a site functions and how it functions over time. And then finally, there's the reflective level, which is more about how you kind of reflect back on a product and your relationship to it. So what can we learn from this? So the visceral level, like I said, is all about kind of gut reaction. And so there's this really interesting psych study, Damasio. He studied people who had suffered brain injuries that resulted in reduced capacity for emotion. It turns out that emotion is very, very important for being able to make decisions. So the subjects of his study had an incredibly hard time deciding between 2 choices, especially if they were sort of arbitrary. What to have for dinner or what book to read. So it's interesting to know that that sort of like gut reaction is actually a huge factor in how we're making choices. And so this is an example of a site that I think is very viscerally pleasing. It's 24hoursofhappy.com. And so it's literally just for a song playing on repeat, and then it's different videos of different people dancing. So it's just like kind of this fun, visceral site. So this relates back to experimenting when you're looking for strategies to convert a user who may be at a tipping point. So here the kind of visceral like aesthetic stuff really matters, and it's also a place for very easy wins. So you can do subtle text changes like we did with the placeholder text, or images like the Obama campaign. And then I'll get into a case study here. So in the wake of the tsunami in Haiti in 2010, former presidents Clinton and Bush formed the Haiti Fund. So they had this landing page, a single-page form, and they're trying to collect money to help with relief efforts. And they brought in an experimentation expert to say, hey, can we do any better? And they suggested adding a picture. So we're adding this emotional connection asset, like when people are kind of deciding, is it worth it? And people are always deciding, is this worth my time? Is it worth my money? This sort of brings it back home, like I'm doing this for a reason. And so by changing this, they got 8% higher donations per page. And then similarly, since a user is kind of, they're at this tipping point, so if you can make it in any way easier for them. So in this case, reducing effort by getting rid of 2 optional fields. Just the form looked shorter and more conquerable, so people were more likely to fill it out. And this resulted in an 11% higher conversion. So visceral lessons. 1, tweaking aesthetics, like we saw with Obama, and just like kind of pictures and text. These are easy wins. 2, making it easy, eliminating things that maybe aren't necessary, or just giving this kind of idea that it might be easier. And then reminding users why they're doing it, as we saw with the picture in the Haiti. And then, oh, that's it. Okay. So the second level of cognitive processing, behavioral. So how usable is a site for a user, and how does the relationship progress over time as they sort of learn your site and learn how to use it? So I like Trello a lot. This is sort of my example of a very usable site. It's a really simple to-do list type thing, but it's got a very shallow learning curve. It's very easy to just drag things around. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this research study, which I thought was very interesting. When people were asked to solve difficult problems, they performed a lot better when they had just been given a small gift. And so in the context of this study, which is, they had been watched a 30-second comedy clip. So they had been given the gift of laughter. So this relates to this MailChimp case study where, so in rebranding their website, MailChimp added Freddie. So Freddie's job is to just like not interact with the content really, but to just kind of like have these little fun quips, and they're totally random every time. So here's like a tweet from somebody who saw a quip from Freddie, and she says, "Whoa, I just logged into MailChimp, and the little monkey in the corner says, 'Hey Kate, new haircut, muy guapo.'" How do they know? So it just happened to line up that she got a haircut that day, but she found it fun. And then this is even more relevant. So Leah Ford says, "Oh, MailChimp monkey, just as I get frustrated wrangling email addresses, you're there with your little witticisms to cheer me up." So MailChimp noticed that after they added Freddie and his little quips, that people were actually completing their newsletters more. So what can we learn? So one, usability is pretty common sense, but then also like thinking about your users and your app and what kind of state of mind they're in and what you're asking them to do and maybe how you can help them get through it. So this is really relevant for places like maybe Khan Academy or Code School or Lumosity, where you're actually asking people, or form building, things like that, where you're asking your user to perform something difficult, and so if you can cheer them up or make them happy, then they're going to be more successful. And then finally, we have the reflective level. So this is sort of about how your relationship forms with the product over time and how it relates back to kind of how you feel about yourself. So for example, I'm a proud Apple user. So over time, the reflective level is sort of informed by the behavioral and the visceral and also kind of product marketing. So I think one example of a site that has like high reflective value is GitHub. So it's like highly gamified. People compete for like stars on their repos and watchers, and a lot of people try to like get their whole contributions to be like solid green because they're contributing every single day. So it's like this sort of street credit idea. There's another psych study I wanted to talk about. Skinner studied variable reward schedule, and so he studied rats. And he would give them food when they click this little lever. And so in his experiment, some rats were on a fixed ratio schedule, which means they would get cheese every other time they clicked the lever. And then other rats were in a variable ratio schedule. So they might get it one time and then miss a few and then get a bunch. And so it was totally random, and it drove the rats crazy. They were clicking furiously. And so this is like the same sort of principle that drives people to play slot machines or to kill bad guys in a video game, or maybe even just slay your inbox, just kill those messages. So it's all about this sort of need to control and dominate our environment, and the inability to do so makes us crazy. So for me personally, that's Minecraft. Diamonds are kind of hidden in the universe erratically, and I'll dig forever to find a diamond. So what can we learn from that? So exclusivity and sort of like this pride level. So I think GitHub does a really good job of this, and Lumosity also does a good job of this, where you're sort of keeping people's score, and so you're kind of incentivizing using the app a lot because you kind of get like pride out of it. Gamification, similarly, this idea that you compete and you get points and you're kind of driven to do this. And then finally, the variable rewards. And we kind of see this with Freddie from MailChimp, where you don't kind of know which quip you're going to get, and it might be really funny, so your click-through rate is going to be higher. Okay, so we've covered basically everything. So why you might want to experiment, and how to get started with experimenting, and how we can use psychology to kind of think of other things to test. And then finally, I just want to talk about, like, once you've done running an experiment and you know you want to ship something, the beauty of it is that you don't have to care about comments like this. So, new Netflix interface is complete crap. This was the most liked comment on their blog when they released their new design. But, like, do you remember the old design? Like, this was the old design, and then they released this one, which I love. And so their manager of experimentation, he commented on this, and he was like, well, we were looking at the metrics, and people were watching more, they liked it better, and they were more engaged. So they could ship with confidence, which is, like, the best part about A/B testing, is that you have data to show that this is the best thing for our users, and people actually are going to like it in the long run. And then it also, because you're backed by data, it eliminates this sort of tendency towards HIPPO, which is highest paid person's opinion. So if your VP of product doesn't like it, you can be like, well, look at the numbers. And so that's been really great at Twitter, because I think it drives this sort of creative freedom where kind of anybody can propose an experiment, because you're showing it to a small subset of users, and you just never know when something's really going to jive. So that's my pitch for A/B testing. I hope you all will try it if you're not doing it already. And then here are some resources: Emotional Design, Designing for Emotion, and A/B Testing. These are all books that I read in preparation for this talk. And A/B testing in particular had a bunch of the cool examples that I showed. So thank you.